let's get started. All right. So hello, everyone. Welcome to week 12. We're coming down to the wire, winding down a week to give thanks. And hopefully, we can get through these last few lessons of the next, I think it's 3 weeks now. All right. So here we go. I'm going to dive right into it. Let me make sure I don't miss anyone as far as attendance before I get started. One last check. Yep. Dylan's here. All right, here we go. All right, we're going into module 12, and this involves views. Views are a very interesting aspect of SQL. Someone came in. I've used views quite a bit. The importance of views is that they're very essentially flexible, but it does involve just a regular way of approaching and displaying data. So don't let it confuse you. All right. So everyone can see my slides, right? I always have to check to make sure I'm not saying something and you can't see. So we're going to go right into topic 1, creating views. We're going to talk about this. We're going to list 3 uses for views from the standpoint of a DBA, explain from a business perspective why it's essential to be able to create and use logical subsets of data derived from one or more tables, fun stuff. Use a single base table, create a view with and without column aliases. Yeah. Create a complex view that contains group functions to display values from 2 tables and retrieve data from a view. I would tell you right now that views, essentially how they're treated, they're just like tables. So take that to heart. All right, so take a minute to look back at what you've learned from the Oracle Academy. Ooh, how easy would it be to explain what you know to someone who hasn't taken the class? I mean, I'm pretty sure you're all relatively comfortable from what I can see in the assignments, unless you're having your little sister or little brother do it, but we're going to assume that's not the case. But you should pat yourself on the back. You've learned quite a bit. You've learned some of the fundamentals of SQL, which is still so important. I mean, I've been doing SQL for a long time, and yet it's probably the best or the most important part of dealing with data that sometimes is overlooked. So basically, your level of knowledge, believe it or not, although Oracle says this, with all the things that are happening with data now, most of the industry is requiring that their professionals go back and at least learn how to query a table in a relational database. So, but yes, pat yourself on the back, pump your fist. This is good stuff. All right, so now imagine yourself as a DBA of a business. You can be that now. And basically, when I started as a DBA, I did have rudimentary knowledge of SQL, and it grew as I grew in the responsibility. So what do you do when a manager asks you to make it possible for him to be able to retrieve and input data? And that's always a danger. Never let your managers touch the database. That would be a general policy to think about it, because sometimes they do things outside of the realm and all of a sudden you have to recover and do damage control. So, but don't make it too complicated. He just wants to retrieve or create reports, and that's usually the case. It's of course, with the advent of AI and all these things that are around now, it's a lot easier for them not to make a mess, but still, you have to be very important. So should these employees have access to all the company's data? Absolutely not. No, not at all. So how will they execute commands that require join conditions, subqueries, etc.? You don't even want to go there. You, as a DBA, you want to keep control of the integrity and the access and management of the data. So yes, it is really wise not to allow data input from anyone. You think that, well, man, probably users can't make that many mistakes, but yes, it's often you're recovering from something that was done just from a complacent perspective. Yes, that's right. You can tell them to pick between Power BI and some other type of reporting engine. They may not even know what that is. But when it comes to just managing the data as a DBA, you want to be in total control. Believe me, I allowed some flexibility there for users. But anyway, so views are a solution to that. And it's basically what a view is essentially kind of a special specific version. They call it virtual representation. So it's kind of apart from the table itself, but it is, and we'll learn all about this, but it's a way to customize particular data that a user can access and manipulate. So that's kind of what a view is in a nutshell. So it's like a table. It is an object. So Oracle says views are not real tables. Sometimes that can become confusing because views, and think of it as like of a window. And I think I say this in here somewhere. It's a window to that table. So you specifically build the window where, hence the name view. The view contains no data. So I don't want you to be confused by this, but you do have access to the data that's referenced by the table. So yeah, that last sentence, it functions as a window through which data from tables can be viewed or changed. And you can set up a view to be a specific scenario, etc. All right. So the tables that you use to create the views are called base tables. Please remember that. And a view is a query stored as a select statement. You know all about select statements. So take a look at this example. And we're going to go into the whole aspect of creating a view, but I always like to start with a very clear example. Create view, and this is the view name, and then it's a select query. So think about that. You're just taking a select query to create a nice little view to the table. So, and as you can see here on the right, a view can be utilized on the DML side, just like a table. Now, in certain scenarios, and we'll talk about this later, let's say you don't want that manager to manipulate any of the data in the view. You just want them to basically select data. And so you can create those constraints, et cetera. And we'll talk about that later. All right. So why use a view? You're probably thinking, well, why don't they just use, or can we just kind of change the limitations around the table? Well, you can create a specific view of the table to restrict access to the rest of the data. Now, it's hard to envision this in our little database because we have only a few tables, but the table is representative of kind of a company model. Think of it that way. So views, Diana has a question. Do people ever use views to hide data? Well, when you say hide data, are you referring to, wait, okay, so that a view to hide data. Usually you use a view to not hide data or provide a way for someone to access data, specific amount or specific data itself. So to hide data, no, I think that would not be a good use case for a view. That's an interesting question, Diana. I think I'll ponder that for a little bit. All right. Hopefully that is somewhat of an answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So views can reduce the complexity because sometimes you can provide the complexity within the select statement, and then all the user needs to do, or they just simply need to select and provide formatting or whatever. Yes, some of the front end tools will do that for you, but in some scenarios you may have to create a view and then train, or even create a connection to kind of a front end. All of those things are useful for views. As a matter of fact, most of the time, as far as views and databases, when you're using embedded SQL in different scenarios as far as code, it's usually hitting a view and not the table. And the view is designed specifically for that purpose. Let's say for example, you're doing data entry and you're inputting information about certain employees or et cetera. Maybe you'll create a view for that. And that's that's a more sophisticated example, but let's say you're using a view for someone to view their information. That's kind of odd. That's a double entendre, but anyway, so let me get back to the slides here. For example, the creator of the view can construct a join. So yes, you can create all the complications within the select statement. And the user, all the user has to do is essentially select the data, provide formatting or whatever they need. And the whole idea is that is the scenario where you're lessening the amount of complexity as far as accessing the data. So views can be used to retrieve data from several tables. As we know, we can build that join and make it look like this is a particular table for this scenario. And usually views, in my experience, I mean, it may be temporary, and then you drop it, and you may build another one. And sometimes, as far as the interaction with data, you may develop a way to essentially create views kind of dynamically. So, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So it does provide a way, in a nutshell, for users to access a specific, amount of data that's associated with one or more tables, or maybe even the entire kind of the database schema. All right, so to loop back, creating views, as you saw in that little example, so it's create and it's create or replace, and we've seen this before. If the view exists, then you're going to replace it. We'll talk about force and no force, the view and the name, and aliases, and then and then it is truly a query or subquery. And then we have things like with check option, and I'll explain what all that means with read only. And those two constraints are very useful because you can restrict, access and just essentially how the view is used. So here are the explanations for those components. Or replace recreates the view if it already exists, and you probably can figure that out. Force creates a view whether or not the base table exists. So you can force a view, and sometimes in our scenario, that may not make sense, but well, that one is kind of hard to imagine in our simple scenario. But in some instances, you may want to force the view just for an instant, so that when the user needs that particular view, they can access it. Now, no force creates a view only if the base table exists. Sometimes you do need to ensure, or even for security purposes, that you're using either one of these, depending upon what the scenario is. The view name is the view name. The alias specifies the name for each expression selected by the view's query. So you can alias that type of. So basically, you can alias the view itself, but usually the view name is appropriate for that view. But sometimes you want to associate that with the base table, etc. And then subquery is a select statement, and this is essentially what you use to create this view table. Pretty straightforward, right? And then with check option specifies that rows remain accessible to the view after insert or update operation. So, and all about timing and ensuring that when the data is being changed via some type of DML, you always want to check to make sure when the view is built, it is based on the latest version of the table. And then constraints are constraints, and this is the name assigned to a check option constraint. Just basically you're checking to make sure the view is valid data. And you can actually classify it as read only. This is the last item. Ensures that so you can't do update or insert. It's just select only. That's when there's read only. And I can tell you right now, as a DBA, I would say about 90% of the views for like essentially the bulk of the users will always read only. The views that I would have to use for complicated processes were the ones that I would not, I would actually open up. So, and those are very important. You can pretty much lock down a view just with the check option and the constraint and the read only. All right, so let's look at some examples again. You've seen this, so here's a view from Excuse me. So the view we're calling view Euro countries. And so create or replace view, select country ID, region ID, country name, so specific columns, capital from WF countries, that's our table, right? For locations like Europe. And basically it's going to create that table. And it's always good, with any of the database objects to test and see that, that the process was successful. So you go back and do a select star from, just like, and you treat it just like a table. So that view name was view Euro countries, and we get all the countries in Europe. All right, so there are some guidelines for creating views, of course, always rules and guidelines. The subquery that defines a view can contain complex select syntax. So it can be as complex as it needs to be as far as your view. Now, we've learned some pretty relatively complex queries, subqueries. The select query for the view can be any of those. So the subquery defines a view. It should not contain order by. So please remember the order by clause is specified when you tree data from the view. So when you create the view, let me say this slowly, you cannot use an order by. When you obtain data from the view, you can order by. So it becomes like a temporary table in essence. In other database management systems, the view and temp tables are basically kind of the same thing, but I'm not going to confuse you. A view is just something that you can specifically create for a specific purpose. You can use the or replace basically just to check, and generally when you're creating a view, because unless you're on top of all the objects, or replace is not going to hurt anything. We don't have a lot of problems with users, etc. But create or replace is always a good thing to use when creating objects. And then you can alias the columns just like any other aliases in the subquery of your view. So in the select statement. So maybe you want the columns to say something a little bit different or to display something a little bit different, and that's where you would do it. So remember that select statement that creates the view is basically the main engine of how the data is presented in this kind of temporary view of your table. There's some features. There's two classification of views, simple and complex. Now I will extract that here in a little bit. And this table summarizes a simple view. Just usually it's just one table. It doesn't contain, we haven't covered functions, but it doesn't contain functions, and it normally doesn't contain groups of data or group functions. The simple view is usually just select these columns or all the columns. Usually it's specific columns from a table, and you can perform, and usually you do allow users to perform any DML, insert, update, delete, from a view. Not all, this says yes in Oracle, but not, I would say not always here as well. Complex views, I would actually put no here. The complex view is created specifically for the user to access and retrieve data, not much anything else. And it'll be, that select statement in a complex view is so usually a join or a subquery or even something with functions and group by and all that. So, and usually you don't want anyone to really run a lot of, especially not any manipulation of the data. So that's essentially the difference between a simple and a complex view. Of course, it can go beyond that, and you do have to remember that views. I'll keep saying this because I've done this a lot. Views are usually done for a specific purpose, and usually they're dropped, and because the purpose will change. All right. A simple view, and as illustrated in the guidelines, it's usually just one table. As you saw with this view Euro countries, this is a simple view. And we will give the user the opportunity to run DML, like insert, update, delete, merge, whatever they need. Because sometimes they may need to do that with maybe other front ends or just something. It's all about the scenario for the user. We saw that view before. So as far as column names, you see here, you may want to change it just to match the view itself. So if we created that view that I just ran, the Euro countries, so country ID, we want to simplify it by calling it ID, country name, just calling it country, capital city. And then when we create the view itself, those aliases can be created for that. And see here, there's two methods to create those aliases. You can create them all at once in this little parentheses method. Or you can, usually this way is a little bit cleaner, you know, which column is going to be alias, but you just have to keep track. Okay. So it is possible to create a view whether or not the base table exists. And this, as I said before, and there's certain scenarios for this, we probably won't see that. A DBA may want to do that just because there's something that they want to as far as grant privileges, etc. Normally, you don't want to force a view or use the syntax force. The no force is always the default. So basically, for our purposes, and generally my practice was that there should always be a table associated with your view. That makes it less complex and cleaner. All right, so let's talk about complex views and the difference between complex views. You probably guessed it, more than one table, so joins or subqueries or whatever. Usually it's joins. I've seen a lot of complex views use joins and subqueries and functions. So here's kind of a very basic example of what I would label a complex query, because we have a join in here. The view name is Euro countries again. We have aliases, country ID, country name, capital, region name from WF countries, and we're joining that to WF world regions using region ID where location. So basically, we're adding regions. So yes, that makes it a complex. It doesn't seem like it's that complex, but this would be a good way that if we wanted to have a user query countries in Europe, and make it easy for them so they're not dealing with joins, and that would be a simple reason to do that. That's the result of that, including all of the aliases. And you notice the aliases are just like regular columns, and that there's a key here. So remember, when you create a view, these are the column names: ID, country, capital city, region, and that's where it can get a little confusing to someone who doesn't understand views. When you query this view, you want to use these aliases that were created when the view was actually created. Does that make sense to everyone? Whoops. All right. All right, where am I? All right. Group functions, just like any other group functions, you use the group functions and use the group by, all of that applies, but when you use a group function, it automatically becomes a complex view. So we're going to call this view high pop or high population. And basically we want to, you know, group all basically the population of each of the regions. So that could be a useful view. And so that's just a view, just another little view table, all right? All right, and as I said before, just kind of a repeat. If you want to modify a review, it's always create or replace. There's no alter view. Just remember that. Create or replace, and then make your changes. So this is an example. If we're changing anything, like we're changing the column names, it's a create or replace. You just run it again, and that will make the appropriate changes. Although I don't know how much we changed there, but the point is that to alter a viewer, you have to run a create or replace. Right? Right, here are our key terms. Pretty straightforward. Alias, complex view, create view, force, no force, replace, simple view, subquery, view name. Complex, that should be complex view, not complex review. I was wondering why I put that in there. So that should be complex view. All right. All right, not too bad, right? Views are pretty straightforward. There's not really a lot of complexity in creating views, but we need to cover that because it's very important to understand how these can be used. All right, so DML operations and views. I'll sum this up. Basically, a view is just like a table, so it follows all the requirements, all the rules, all that's needed, just as if you were modifying data in a table. And that's where and we're going to talk about the with check option clause and with read only clause. And as I said before, most of the views that I created were for those managers that had no idea. They were using some front end and trying to figure out. But anyway, let's get into it. So view simplify, create simplification for the users as far as accessing and viewing data. It's usually the DBA that creates the views, and usually it's your job. You'll get a request from your manager to say, I need to have this data. So you have to put together that query. You create a view, send them the access to the view and have them go at it. And well, you monitor all their actions, but that's usually what you would want to do with a view. So in a nutshell, a view follows all, as I said before, as far as insert, update, delete. And basically, this is generally you want to perform it on simple views because that was created for that specific purpose. And as I said before, as far as complex views, usually you don't want a user or someone that's not you to touch those. All right, so if you create a view that allows users to view restricted, yeah, so you just have to be very careful because you control the creation of the view. So you satisfy those requirements and nothing else. That's generally the case. So for example, the view shown in here was created for the managers of Department 50. The intent of this view is to allow managers of Department 50 to see information about their employees. Simple as that. So we don't want to give them access to any other departments, or our view is select those columns from employees where department ID is equal to 50. Simple enough. And if they bring up a query or bring up that view or doing anything with that view, they can only view. So that is actually I've seen those type of examples as far as views quite a lot, restricted to a department. So controlling views, using the view, as stated, it is possible to insert, update, and delete information, which, yeah, be careful with that. But the thing of it is, so this is where it gets a little tricky. Whenever you run DML, you're running it to the view, but you have to remember it's going to impact the table, the base table, and the data. Yeah, view is a window, but it still has that effect on the data, especially if you're running DML. So this is where you use the check option or with read only. If you don't want the user to impact any of the data on the base table or tables, then you add these particular clauses. So the with check option basically checks for constraint. It does everything that you need, but the highest level of protection, as you'll see, is with read only. So here's the syntax for, so this view is defined without the check option. So that means that you can do just about anything and it will impact the base table, which is the employees table. Maybe you want that, maybe you don't, et cetera, et cetera. So what with check option ensures that the DML operation performed will stay within that view and doesn't impact anything else. So yes, it impacts the table, but you only want that manager in Department 50 to impact his employees. So you just basically put with check option constraint. And so if he tries to do anything outside of Department 50, you get the virtual smack on the wrist. And so that's the whole idea. So in here, if he tried to modify, yeah, so that's the error. You can't do that. Stop it. All right. And then the read only, I love this one. As I said, I use it a lot because basically you can't run any DML. You can't run any of the insert, update, or delete. And for the most part, as I said before, views are usually designed so that for viewing data, not manipulating or impacting data. All right, some restrictions as far as DML, simple views and complex views differ in their ability to allow, generally, and you create that as a DBA. And essentially, you want to keep the simple views pretty wide open. You want to lock down the complex views for any type of, so I always make the complex views read-only, just in general. So you cannot remove a row from an underlying base table if the view contains the following group functions grouped by the distinct and a pseudo column or role num keyword. Those are the kind of the restrictions on views, but that's very similar to what restrictions you have on tables anyway. All right. I just said that. You cannot add data. So these, you can review these, but in a nutshell, be very careful how you use views. I mean, I can say that over and over and over again. Once you get into group functions, this is a complex view. You do want to lock it down so that, nothing's going to impact your data through this view. All right. And that lesson was pretty straightforward. I will tell you, and you'll go through, hopefully you'll go through some of the practice queries. With check option really protects you, and read only takes care of any unknowns. Just as simple as that. When you're creating views, remember views, and I'll say this again, views are just that window to the table and your data, and you really don't want to open that up too much. All right, we're buzzing right along. So how do you manage views once you've created them? Or maybe you're like, well, maybe I shouldn't create that view. So we're going to learn how to remove a view and create and execute a query using an inline view. And you'll see what that is. And then finally, we're going to talk about top-end analysis query. It's a little bit different. I think Oracle decided to just throw this in as a kind of conclusive part of this topic. Top-end analysis is kind of a hierarchy, but you'll see. So learning and replacing views wouldn't be completed if you didn't know how to remove them, right? Views are created for specific, 9.99 times out of 10, the view is just created for a specific purpose. Is it going to maintain that specific purpose over and over? Is that repetitive? More than likely not. There's always these minor changes, and you have to just create another view. So when a view is no longer needed, and you can't really modify it, so this is the whole idea where you need to learn how to just remove it. And so we're going to learn how to do that now. All right, the setup. So because a view contains no data of its own, that can be confusing, but it technically doesn't. It's just, it's there and you have access to the data. Removing it does not affect the data in the underlying table. Remember that. If the view is used for insert, update, delete, data in the past, those changes in the base table remain. So basically, once the view is gone, the table is still there. Remember that. So deleting a view simply removes the view as an object. Woohoo. And yes, it's very simple. Drop view, view name. Done. Out, gone. No longer part. Drop is very powerful. Once you drop it, it's gone. So we don't have to worry about the creator and all that. So if you don't need a view, I've created and dropped views or replaced, a million times, it seems like, during my DBA lifetime. So, all right. So inline views is a little bit different, and they're also referred to as subqueries in the from clause. So, and you'll see this in a minute. You insert a subquery in the from clause just as if the subquery was a table name. Inline views are commonly used to simplify complex queries by removing joins, operations, and they're like, well, why don't we just do that all the time? And that's what I used to say too. So take a look at this example. We're selecting last name, salary, E department ID, ED max sal from employees. Oh, what's that? And then we have it subquery, select department ID, max salary, alias max sal from employees grouped by department ID. So this is like, wow, that seems pretty complex. So the data returned by the subquery is given an alias D. The whole data, that's all given the alias D, right? Right? Hopefully you're following me. Which is then used in conjunction with the main query to return selected columns from both query sources. So basically, last name, salary, department ID, max salary. Would you need something like that? Possibly in a report or whatever. But you see that max sal is an alias. And it's this, we're seeing it here. We can use it here because it's returned here as an alias. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. Does everyone see that? That it's like an inline kind of it's just there. You're creating a view, kind of a temporary table to hold that max salary so that you can add it to the columns. Does that make sense? Did I explain that well enough, or is everyone like, what? What did he say? That instructor is on drugs. No. No, and that can be useful or that can be confusing. Sometimes you can get away with that. And obviously there's several other ways to accomplish that. So it's less inline views is basically kind of a shortcut. I never really used them a lot. I would just create a view and just go from there. All right, so that's inline views. Yeah, you'll get a few examples of that. All right, shifting gears a little bit, top-end analysis is a SQL operation and is basically used to rank results. Woohoo! Hierarchies. So the use of top-end analysis is useful when you want to retrieve like the top 5 records. You know, in a table, you just use this particular type of approach. So select roll num as longest employee, last name, hire date. For employees where roll num is less than equal to 5, order by hire date. So that's kind of the idea. So we want to bring back the employees that have been there the longest. Right. So that would be that particular type of query here. But let's see. And yes, I'm skipping over this, but the top-end analysis starts with the roll num as longest employee. The roll num is what drives that. And so we can give that an alias, and we see roll num as longest employee, last name, hire date, and this is essentially, I guess that's where this comes in. It uses another version of an inline view or a subquery to return a result. And then you can use roll num in your query to assign a roll number. That's all it does. See this roll num 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the main query, when you use it basically less than or equal to 5 is to get your top 5 as far as the length of employment. And that's where we're using hire date, order by hire date. So it's creating a kind of a 1 through 5, an ordinal scenario, if that makes sense. If you need something like that quickly, and also you could, I don't know, you could probably generate a very basic select query to do mostly the same. But that's what top-end analysis is, just putting things in order. Using the row num. Remember the row num just assigns a row. King is number 1, although the rows are numbered anyway. So if you want to do that to be absolutely certain, that's fine. But usually, if you can get away without using row num here, just running the same with the select query. All right. And this is further, I'm attempting to further explain all the components here, our nice little subquery here, ordering by a hire date. I mean, there's not anything complicated in this whole idea of top-end analysis, but Oracle decided that, we need to illustrate that and tell you what ordinal means, etc. You may use something like that in a larger database scenario if you wanted to bring back like the top employees as far as salary or something like that. So yeah, this is explaining the same query. We see order by and restricting the rows. I'm pretty sure that, let me just check. Does that make sense to everyone? This whole idea of top-in analysis is really, it can be useful, but it doesn't really go beyond the fact that we're just ordering, these employees based on hire date. You can simply run that select query, right? Select last name, hire date from employees ordered by hire date, still get the same thing. But we decided to, oh, this is more important to do this row num. And so we're only using row num to make sure we get only the top five. And that's what the top in analysis is all about. If we only want the top five, then we do it that way. Although you can do, why wouldn't you just do, I don't know, there has to be another way to perform that. But the row num is your driving force as far as top in analysis, top 2, top 5, top 10. Excuse me. Any questions about that? Or and does that make sense to everyone? How you would run this particular query? Questions or comments or concerns? I think I put everyone to sleep now, right? Yeah, I would say, but all right, so there we go. Views are pretty important. They become very useful. Going. Dropping a view, drop view name, inline views, top in analysis, and row num, kind of the same idea here. So yeah, it wasn't too bad. I'll go away. All right. Okay, so now that you're all waiting for Thanksgiving, let's see what we have to do this week. Not too bad, not nearly as much as last week. So hopefully you can get this all out of the way either before the big holiday or after. Seems like you all wait until after anyway. Lots of practice queries on views. Remember, views are just a kind of a temporary way to provide access to tables for a specific purpose. Okay, practice queries, and then practice assignment, then solutions. Nothing too out of the ordinary here. Good way to be very comfortable about views. Views are pretty straightforward. I mean, you really can't lose with enhancing your knowledge about views, because they can become very useful in many ways. All right, what else do we have here? So please go through the practice and the solutions. And then we have one assignment. Please download. And I even made the document a little bit cleaner. Actually, I didn't. Professor, I forget her name. Anyway, so you'll have three prompts for views in your assignment this week. Pretty straightforward, no big deal. Knock that out of the park. And then we have our requisite quiz, creating views, DML operation on views, and managing views. Piece of cake due on Sunday, and that's it. Very easy week. So you can relax, enjoy your Thanksgiving meal, right? Not too much pressure to finish assignments or homework. Easy week. Yeah, we're kind of coasting now. I think we just to give you and I'll give you a preview next week as to what's left, as we'll have down to the wire, 2.5 weeks, kind of. Yeah. Any questions or concerns? Easy night. You're also quiet. Even Phil's quiet. But hopefully you all enjoyed the rain. This is the most rain we've had for about 100 years or something like that. And that I read somewhere. In like this week. So yeah, we never have this much rain in November, so yeah. But anyway, hope you enjoy your evening, and I hope you all have a, oh, that's what I forgot to show. I did have one last slide that says Happy Thanksgiving. So we're all thankful. Be thankful for where we're at, and I do appreciate all the hard work you're all doing. Please keep it up. And I will see you all next Monday, if you can wake up from all the turkey and ham that you want to eat, and mashed potatoes and pie and whatever else you celebrate. So please enjoy your Thanksgiving. Knock the homework out, and we'll continue to the end. All right. Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.